I want to start over 20 years ago in the United States Senate. And what we're going to do is talk about Senator Sam Brownback, who at the time was the senator from Kansas. He later went on to be the governor of Kansas, and then he worked also in the State Department after that. Anyway, back in October of 2003, he had a picture of a 21-week-old fetus, a baby in the womb. So 21 weeks after conception, he showed this picture of this boy because they were trying to correct a birth defect in this young boy. And he showed this picture in the United States Senate. You can see the hand here coming out of the womb there, holding the finger of the doctor. Here's a better picture of it. Anyway, he held this picture up in the United States Senate, and the kid was later born. His name turned out to be Samuel, the same name as the senator. And so he asked the question, is little Samuel's hand the hand of a person, or is it the hand of a piece of property? And Senator Barbara Boxer from California said this on the Senate floor: I am not a doctor and I am not God. I trust other human beings to make these decisions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, do you need to be a doctor or God to know that that right there is a human being? And she says, I trust other people to make these decisions. Why do we send congressmen and senators to Washington to make these decisions? Newsflash, we're not a democracy. We are a representative republic where we send representatives to make decisions like this in our federal and in our state and even in our local governments. They represent us. So if she can't do her job, why would she even be there? By the way, she was replaced after she left the Senate in 2016 by a woman by the name of Kamala Harris. You may have heard of her. In any event, what I want to do with that introduction is talk about, does Jesus trump your politics? And we're going to come back to what we just saw there a little bit later. We're going to try and do three things. The first thing we're going to cover is, can we legislate morality? Because you always hear you can't legislate morality. So why would Christians even be concerned about what's going on in politics? The second thing we're going to do is, should Christians be involved in politics? For some reason, in our country, a lot of people, including pastors, think Christians ought not be involved in politics, as if only atheists are qualified to run the country. So we're going to look into that and the separation of church and state and those kind of objections. And then we're going to get to the key point: what should Christians do when we don't like either candidate? Not that I have anybody in mind, all right? But we might agree that maybe we don't like either of these candidates, so what are we as Christians supposed to do? Now, with that said, I have a bit of a warning, because what I'm going to say is going to be controversial. Some of you are not going to agree with me. That's okay. You have a right to be wrong. And I am going to be correct, not politically correct. There's too much political correctness out there. And at the end of this presentation, we'll see that that can be very deadly. So let's start right here at point one. Can we legislate morality? How many times have you heard people say you can't legislate morality? You probably heard people say that. But let me ask you a question. You see these actions up here: abortion, whether life is valuable, marriage, men and women sports, transitioning children, parental rights, even murder, theft, and rape. Do we legislate on these issues? Yes, and these are all moral issues. You always hear you can't legislate morality. The truth of the matter is, that's all you can legislate. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. Even speed limits out here on Highway 77 are a legislation of morality. Why? Because speed limits imply that life is valuable. Otherwise, we'd have no speed limits. Go as fast as you want, doesn't matter. So Morality is always legislated. The only question is, whose morality will be legislated? In fact, Dr. Gsr and I, my mentor who I learned so much from going to Southern Evangelical Seminary, ses.edu, he and I wrote a book many years ago called Legislating Morality. Very creative title, right? Because you always hear you can't legislate morality, and all we did is point out that everybody's trying to do that. Pro-abortionists are trying to do that. Pro-life people are trying to do that. Everybody's trying to legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality? Now, when people say, don't impose your morality on me, we're going to see the response here in just a minute. But probably more of a common objection is this. What about the separation of church and state? First of all, where is the separation of church and state in the Constitution? It's not in the Constitution. It's in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptists in about 1803. He was writing a letter to these Baptists in Connecticut because they were fearful that Jefferson might set up a national church. And of course, that's what they fled from England for. We don't want a national church. So they were worried, and Jefferson wrote them, and he said, there is an impregnable wall between church and state. There's a separation of church and state. But for Jefferson, the wall was one way. In other words, he didn't want the state telling the church what it could or couldn't do. But he was fine with the church influencing the state. If you noticed, during COVID, the opposite occurred. The state told the church what to do, rather than the church being the conscience of the state. Hopefully, we will not fall for that again. The state has no authority to tell the church what to do. That's why we have a First Amendment, which doesn't say anything about separation of church and state. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In other words, Congress isn't supposed to make laws regulating the church or prohibiting the exercise of the church, the exercise of religion. We don't want a national church, but we want to allow churches to influence the state, and we also want freedom of religion among the congregants or atheists or any other sort of religious believer. They have freedom of religion. But, even if the separation of church and state was in the Constitution, it wouldn't affect this argument at all, that we ought to be engaged in politics and we can legislate morality. Why? Because when we tell people don't murder your children, we're not legislating religion. We're not telling people where, when, how, or if to worship. That would be legislating religion. But we can't avoid telling people how they ought to treat one another, and that's legislating morality. In fact, you have atheists who are pro-life. They have no justification for being pro-life. There's no external moral standard beyond them by which they can say murdering people is wrong. But nevertheless, that many of them are pro-life. They're not legislating necessarily a religious position. They're legislating a moral position, and there's a difference. You can legislate morality without legislating religion. In fact, everybody does so. Everybody legislates a moral position. Now, of course, these positions are related. Thou shalt not murder is also a religious decree as much as it is a moral decree. But if you're going to say you can't legislate it because some religious person or some religious system believes it, we couldn't have any laws, could we? Could you have laws against murder if you said any religious law can't be legislated? Could you have laws against theft or rape? No, you'd have to have no laws at all. So just because something is in the Bible doesn't mean you can't legislate it. We're not legislating it necessarily because it's in the Bible. We're legislating it because the natural law that our country was founded on is consistent with the Bible. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created and endowed by their government. No, it doesn't say government. Endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted among men to secure rights. In other words, as we'll see here in a minute, the reason we have a government at all is to protect the rights of innocent people. It's not to give rights. It's not supposed to take away rights. It's just supposed to secure rights. And of course, in 1776, the founders of our nation said King George was not securing our rights. He was legislating immorally. And the Declaration of Independence, if you ever read it, is just one long list of complaints about how King George was legislating immorally. So we're not legislating religion. We are legislating morality, and everybody does that. So when somebody says, don't impose your morality on me, what should you say? Well, first of all, notice this is a self-defeating statement. When somebody says, don't impose your morals on me, you might want to ask them, then why are you imposing that moral on me? You see that? This is a moral statement on top, where they're saying, don't impose morals. Well, that's what they're doing to you. They're saying, you can't impose ought-nots. You ought not impose ought-nots. Well, wait. You're imposing that ought-not on me. Why do you get to impose ought-nots, but I don't? Right? Actually, the better answer is this. When somebody says, don't impose your morality on me, I think you ought to say, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that it's wrong to mutilate children, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 2 said, the Gentiles who do not have the law written on their hearts. This is why you can know right and wrong without a Bible. You can know it. You can know basic right and wrong. Before there was a Bible, did people know you ought not murder people? Of course they did, because it's written on your heart. This is the moral law from which the nation began. It didn't begin as a prescriptive Christian nation that everyone had to be a Christian. There's no religious test in the federal government for you to be a Christian. There were in state governments, by the way. You know, if you look at state constitutions, that they required you to be a believer in Jesus Christ to be in the government. Did you know that? It's not enforced anymore, but you look at the original state constitutions, and they even had their own churches. In fact, the last state to get rid of their state church was Massachusetts in 1833. And they did so just because they thought it wasn't a good idea, not because it was unconstitutional. When those 13 colonies signed the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, they knew they were not in violation of having a state church by signing it. That had to do with the federal government couldn't have a state church. The states could. But that's irrelevant anyway. The point here is that you're not imposing your morality. You're trying to impose the morality. I don't want to impose my moral positions. I'm not the moral arbiter of the universe. I want to impose the morality. And as soon as someone says, well, there isn't a the morality, then they've lost all justification for any moral position they have. Because if it's just their opinion, why are they imposing it on us? I don't know if you've noticed, but we seem to be creating rights about every 10 minutes in this country. Yet many of the people who are saying that we have these new rights are atheists. There are no rights if there is no God. There's not only no right to abortion, there's no right to life if there is no God. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage if there is no God. There are no trans rights, human rights, Christian rights. There are no rights to anything unless God exists. Everything is just a matter of opinion. You say, well, government gives me my rights. No, government secures your rights. If governments were giving you rights, that would mean when a new government came in and changed their policy, you would have no rights anymore. No, a right is something you have regardless of what anyone says about it. So, we're not legislating religion. We are legislating morality. And we ought not be legislating our own personal morality. We ought to be legislating the morality. In fact, think about even some liberal churches. The Babylon Bee is always helpful for these kind of things. Look at what the Babylon Bee says. Church shouldn't be political, says pastor with BLM pride flags on building. You see, these are to say that there are gay rights or black rights or white rights or red rights or Asian rights. Those are all political, moral positions. Whether you're on the right or the left, you're assuming some sort of moral position. Look, even on the most contentious issue of our day, abortion, both sides are trying to impose a moral position. The pro-life side wants to impose continued pregnancy on the mother. That's a moral position. The pro-abortion side says they have a moral right to choose, and they're imposing death on the baby whenever abortion is chosen. Both of those are moral positions. One says the child has a moral right to life. The other says a woman has the moral right to do what she wants with her own body. But of course, she forgets there's another body involved. Sure, you have a right to do what you want with your own body in most cases, but not if you kill somebody else in the process. So, both sides are arguing from a moral position, and both sides, they think they have a moral right. In fact, you may have seen the debate between Trump and Harris. Do you remember when Kamala Harris says it's immoral what you're doing, Donald Trump, to prevent abortion? What? It's immoral? By what moral standard is it wrong to try and save the life of a baby? I would ask her, by what moral standard are you saying that? All right, so this is how our country began, with this moral standard. You don't need the Bible to know it. It's consistent with the Bible because it comes from the same source, God, but you don't need to impose religion to have moral rights. You just have to acknowledge God exists in order to justify those rights. And if there is no God, we're not judging by principles, or let me put it another way, we're not governing by principle, we're just simply governing by power. We're just going to overwhelm you with power. That's where cancel culture comes from, ladies and gentlemen. If you can't argue your position on principle, all you can argue is power or use power. I'm just going to shut you up because I can't win the debate, so you need to shut up. By the way, notice that all censorship, most censorship anyway, is an implicit claim to infallibility. I already know the answer, so I don't need to hear from you, so shut up. So, yes, we can legislate morality. That's all we can do is legislate morality. The problem is sometimes we're legislating immorality. Next question, should Christians be involved in politics? To which I respond before, why not? Are only atheists qualified to run the country? But let's just leave that aside for a second. I just want to ask you what this is. Does anyone know what this is? Yes, this is a satellite picture of the Korean Peninsula. There's South Korea. There's the 38th parallel. We fought a war over that. By the way, we're kind of in a truce, but hostilities are still going there, as you know. And this is a homogeneous population of Koreans. South Korea, as you can see, has a lot of productivity. It has light. It has the gospel. It has political freedom. North Korea, on the other hand, is a concentration camp. There's one major reason for the difference between North and South Korea. What is it? Don't say electricity. Huh? Not just Jesus, no. Yes. The reason for the difference between South and North Korea is politics. The South has political freedom. The North does not. Here's my question. Which country would you rather live in? You'd rather live in South Korea, quite obviously. And this is what frustrates me when I hear Christians and often even pastors say, you know, I don't get involved in politics. I just preach the gospel. Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize that politics affects your ability to preach and live the gospel? If you don't think so, try and do what we're doing right now in this room legally in North Korea. Can you do it? Are there any churches in North Korea? Legal churches? No. Why? Because they've ruled it out. Do you know there's no First Baptist Church in Tehran? Do you know there's no Calvary Chapel of Riyadh? Why? Because politically they've ruled it out. There's no crossexamine.org in Egypt because they don't allow it. And we just take it for granted that we have political freedom here. But it's ebbing away. We could lose our religious freedom depending on who we put in office. So don't buy into this idea that I just preach the gospel. Yeah, I want you to preach the gospel, but you ought to also have the ability, the legal ability to preach and live the gospel. In fact, my friend Charlie Kirk puts it this way. The most important thing we can do is preach the gospel and disciple people. The second most important thing we can do is make sure we can do the first important thing. Because if the government gets hostile and comes after you for doing what we're doing right now, that makes it more difficult, doesn't it? Oh, you say, Frank, yeah, but the church really explodes under persecution. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. How do you think it's doing in North Korea? You think it's going to explode over there? Why don't you go over there and be a missionary? See how well you do. Okay, yeah, sure, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But what we don't do is wish persecution on ourselves. Look, life is hard enough already, isn't it? Are we just going to invite persecution on ourselves when we might be able to prevent it and prevent other people from doing evil? I hope so. Now, if you think about it, first of all, what is politics? Maybe we ought to define what it is. What is it? It's just a group of people coming together, deciding how they're going to govern one another. How are we going to do life together? Why shouldn't Christians be involved in that? And if you think about it, politics affects almost every single area of your life. I mean, politics affects your church, your family, your health, your money, your business, your freedom, your property, your school, your safety, the poor, the unborn, evangelism, your faith behavior. Everyone and everything is affected by the laws made in Washington, the laws made in your state governments, and the laws made in your local governments. I mean, just think of it. This is a great building here. Do you know how many hoops they had to jump through to build this place? Why? Politics. Politics affects everything. It affects your purse, how much money you have. What's it being spent on? It affects health care. It affects whether or not you can preach the gospel and live the gospel, whether you have rights or not. Why wouldn't you be involved in that? And if we're going to love our neighbors, shouldn't we want people to pass laws that don't hurt our neighbors? That seems self-evident to me. And we need good laws, and we need a good government. Why? Because we're fallen, we're evil. It's easy to be bad, it's hard to be good. In fact, one of the most, I think, profound things ever said by anyone about government was said by the father of our Constitution, James Madison, who said this: if men were angels, no government would be necessary. Would we need a government if people always did good? No, which is telling you what's the purpose of government. The main purpose of government is to prevent innocent people from being hurt, to protect innocent people from evil. That's the number one role of government. In fact, if you think about this, this is what Paul says in Romans 13, verse 4. He says, the leader does not bear the sword for nothing. What does he mean? The leader has the power to punish evil. And if you don't have somebody who can punish evil, you're going to have a lot of evil in your society. This is why defund the police had to be the dumbest political idea in the 21st century so far. See how long we're going to last if we defund the police. Can you imagine? We're right near Charlotte, North Carolina right now. Can you imagine if the Charlotte police said that tomorrow, for 24 hours, no laws would be enforced. You can do whatever you want for 24 hours and you'll never be prosecuted. What do you think would happen? Would Best Buy survive? Would the Lexus dealer survive? How many people would be murdered, raped, kidnapped, whatever? How many thefts would occur? It would be anarchy. You need a good government. You know, God has established 3 organizations or 3 institutions. The first one he established was marriage. The second one he established was government, Genesis 9:6. The third one he established was the church. Why are Christians only concerned with marriage and the church? Are we only 2/3 of a Christian? We need to be concerned with all of them. God established all of them. We have to ensure that evil is held at bay. Once again, the Babylon Bee helps us here because the Babylon Bee shows us that we're evil. I don't know if you've seen this survey. The study finds 100% of men would eat any fruit given to them by a naked woman. You think, oh, I'd have done better than Adam. No, you wouldn't. You'd have done the same thing. We're evil, so we need a good government. In fact, how should you love your neighbor, right? We're commanded to love our neighbors, aren't we? We're supposed to love our neighbors. Well, here, just a couple of quick questions to show you how we need to be engaged. First question, should Christians care how people are treated? Is there any Christian anywhere who's going to say no? I don't care whether you're conservative or liberal and you consider yourself a Christian. Everyone's going to say, yes, we should care how people are treated. Next question, should Christians care how people are treated by their government? Well, if you're going to say yes to the first, you got to say yes to the second. Of course. Welcome to politics, ladies and gentlemen. If you're going to care how people are treated, you should care how they're treated by their government. Let me ask one other thing. Is there any area of your life where you should not follow Jesus and the apostles? This is why I find it odd that people are going to, even pastors are going to say politics is off limits. Why is it off limits? There is no area of your life that shouldn't be under the direction of Jesus and the apostles, as expressed in the Bible. No area of your life. You should be a Christian at church. You should be a Christian at home. You should be a Christian at work. You should be a Christian at play. You should be a Christian online. You should be a Christian in the voting booth. You should be a Christian everywhere. Does anyone disagree with this? So why do we think that somehow politics is off limits? Maybe because it's hard to talk about. I get it, but that doesn't mean we ought to chicken out. And this election cycle, there's a lot of commotion. Trump has had not only 2 assassination attempts on him, some say even 3. Because he was at the border after the first one and some guy down there wanted to kill him. And then you've got all sorts of crazy behavior going on both sides. It's hard to sort through this. I get it. But that doesn't mean we check out. You say, well, Christians haven't done much in politics. Yeah, I kind of think you're right. Except all of these things they did over the past 2,000 years. Christians abolished slavery, gladiatorial combat, death games, temple prostitution, kidnapped brides, wives as property, infanticide, child labor, child marriage, child sex abuse, child prostitution, class distinctions, and recently in some states, abortion. Yeah, we haven't done much, have we? Tragically, most of us think that our historical perspective is the first page of a Google search. Do you realize that Western civilization was built on the moral precepts of Christianity? Do you realize that Aristotle thought it was fine to have slaves, that people were born to be slaves? Do you realize there weren't things as individual rights in the Roman Empire? That only Romans had rights and only men really had the most rights? It was Christianity that gave us this concept even of equality that is now being used and abused to say that all behaviors are equal. No, all people are equal, but not all behaviors. That's why we have criminal law, by the way. If all behaviors were equal, we wouldn't even have any criminal law, would we? Also, notice, all of these people were involved with secular governments and political leaders. Joseph, Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Nehemiah, Esther, Nahum, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, John the Baptist, Paul, and Jesus. You say Jesus was involved in politics? Where? Ladies and gentlemen, who did Jesus go after the most? The Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Some of them were on the Sanhedrin. That was the Jewish ruling council to whom Rome delegated day-to-day lawmaking authority. They were the politicians. And Jesus went after these people. I'm just going to show one little section where Jesus really dope slapped the politicians of his day. This is from Matthew chapter 23. Notice, by the way, you'll also notice that Jesus wasn't always a nice guy. Don't buy into the idea that Jesus was Barney, okay? Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No. In fact, Jesus said, I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. How often do you hear those passages talked about? But many of you in here know those passages are true. Why? Because you're divided in your own family over Jesus. And you should be. You should be following Jesus despite what your family thinks or what the culture thinks. Anyway, here's what Jesus said to these politicians, these religious politicians called the Pharisees. He said, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. Now, we're going to come back to this phrase right in the middle, the more important matters of the law. It's easy to remember because it's Matthew 23:23. Matthew 23:23. This is Jesus talking politics and religion to the Pharisees. What's his marching orders? He's saying, look, you're tithing your spices, but you're neglecting the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And we're doing that in this country right here. We're telling people what light bulbs they can and can't use, but we won't say, don't murder your children. Kamala Harris wants to ban plastic straws, but she doesn't want to ban child mutilation. She wants to encourage it. Is she neglecting the more important matters of the law? Jesus is telling us what we ought to be concerned with. Yeah, you ought to be concerned with the small parts, but don't neglect the more important matters of the law. What are the more important matters? We're going to get to it in a minute. But as I see it, we got 4 options as a Christian. And these are the 4 options people take with regard to political involvement. The first over here, you've got the flag over the cross. That's the wrong option, because that's idolatry and corruption. If you're saying your country's more important than Jesus, and tragically there are many people out there who seem to be almost saying that. I mean, let's face it, friends. There are some people who, particularly with Donald Trump, they have a cult-like allegiance to the guy. Like no matter what the guy says, they put it even over what Jesus says. That's idolatry. That's corruption. And it may be true on the other side too. I don't know. But don't think your country's more important than the cross. The other is they're equally important. That's idolatry and confusion. Because now you're saying they're not just as important. The cross is always more important. The next option, you just see a cross. These are the people that say, look, I just preach the gospel. I don't get involved in politics. That is you neglecting your neighbor. You think you're loving God, but you're not loving your neighbor. Why shouldn't you care how your neighbor's treated and how you're treated by the laws that you can help put into place? I think the right option is the flag under the cross, where you're loving God and you're loving your neighbor. Because God is number 1, your country is number 2. I mean, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus said, after they asked him, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. Don't neglect your neighbor. Don't put your neighbor over God. So this appears to be the right option, to love God and to love your neighbor. All right, so we have to be engaged. Now, here's where the rubber really meets the road. What should Christians do when we don't like either candidate? Now, can we be honest again, ladies and gentlemen? This guy is hard to defend as a Christian. Personally, he's rude. Personally, he says really off-putting things, foul things sometimes. Sometimes he does and has done things in his past, in particular, that no Christian should support or gloss over. This guy is not the second coming. Are we agreed? So if you have friends that are real hard supporters of Donald Trump, make sure they're supporters for the right reasons. Don't gloss over difficulties that he presents us. And of course, she doesn't have a very good past either, from some of the things I've been reading. So what are we to do? Well, again, the Babylon Bee can help us here. Trump said, I have done more for Christianity than Jesus. Right? You could see Trump saying that, couldn't you? That's why it's funny, because he's a braggart, right? He is. And recently, you may have noticed, Kamala Harris distances herself from Kamala Harris. She won't really live up to any of the things she said in the past, or most of the things she said, except for abortion. That's the sacrament. We got to have abortion everywhere. We got to have the government pay for it. But both of these are flawed candidates. Just personally. Forget about the policies for a second. They are personally flawed candidates. And ladies and gentlemen, everybody is personally flawed to a certain degree. Can we admit that? Some more so than others. And I hear people, particularly those who try and say, don't put too much emphasis on politics. No politician can be your savior. Can we agree with that? That's true. No politician can be your savior. However, no spouse can be your savior either, but it's still important that you pick the right one. Right? If you're going to dismiss politics because no politician can be your savior, then you ought to be dismissing everybody, because no person can be your savior either. Look, Christianity is not just fire insurance. You don't just get saved and then you check out and wait for your body to break down so you can go to heaven. You're here to be salt and light. You're here to cultivate the culture. You're here to protect innocent people from evil. You're here to make disciples. You're here to love God and love others, to know God and to make him known. And that includes everywhere. Again, in church, at home, at work, online, at play, in the voting booth, everywhere. Now, you may have seen Greg Provenzano has sent this around. I saw this too from Pastor Gary Hamrick. Gary Hamrick is a great pastor up near Leesburg, Virginia, Cornerstone Chapel, I think it's called. I spoke there a few years ago. Gary's a Calvary Chapel pastor. And a couple weeks ago, he did this sermon, his Election Day Sermon 2024. I urge you to go watch it. It's quite good. And you can see it at voteyourfaith.net. There's a lot of resources at voteyourfaith.net, including this, and it'll take you to his YouTube channel where you can watch this particular presentation. And Gary was pointing out in his presentation that if you're going to say you got to get 100% of what you want in a candidate, he said, there are very few decisions you make where you get 100%. Are any of you here married? And everybody laughed. Yeah, why? Because as much as you may love your spouse is not 100% perfect. Is he or she? No, and neither are you. Okay? You don't get 100% in virtually any decision you make. Even churches. You go to churches and you go, it's 90% there. Okay, with you there, it's only 80% because you're a pain. Right? You're complaining about everything all the time. You're not going to get 100%. You're also not always going to get a Christian in office. Can we be honest? Donald Trump is not a Christian. I mean, not an evangelical Christian. I saw him in the Ingram report. And he was saying, you got to be good so you can get to heaven. He doesn't understand the gospel. Although I know personally several people have given him the gospel. I don't know whether he doesn't understand it or he's just rejecting it. But he thinks the way you get to heaven, Christianity is all about being good. That's what he thinks. Kamala Harris, I have no idea where she is. Her husband's Jewish. I don't know if she's ever made a profession of faith, but we'll look at her policies and see if she bears any fruit. All right? So, let's go back now to the more important matters of the law. If you don't like the particular candidate at the top of the ticket, you need to remember something. The primary reason you send them is to put certain policies in place. And when you're voting for president, you're not voting for one person. You're voting for 5,000 people to go to Washington and implement an agenda, implement a platform. The question is, what is in the platform? We're going to see here in a minute. But before we do, to amplify what Jesus said here, the more important matters of the law, I don't have time to go through all the scripture passages here, but I want to show you that the Bible continually talks about more important and less important matters when it comes to morality. Notice, there's a moral hierarchy because Jesus talks about the greatest commandment, greater love, greater sin, greater judgment, greater knowledge means greater punishment. And as we just saw, the more important matters of the law. Not all sins are equal. Not all behaviors are equal. Some are more important than others. In fact, Paul even talks about that in Romans 14 when he says that essentially don't major in the minors. We may have differences over minor issues. Give grace there. But let's be unified over the more important matters of the law. So what are the more important matters of the law? Does abortion trump everything else? Well, the right to life is the right to all other rights. If you don't have life, you don't have anything. But I want to show you how radical one side of this particular debate is. This man is 𝗧𝗢𝗓𝗓. And in 2014, he went undercover with his organization and exposed on video that Planned Parenthood was illegally selling body parts from abortions. I'm not going to show you the whole video. It's 8 minutes long. I'll show you maybe 3, just so you can get a gist of it. He is meeting with one of the top officials in Planned Parenthood undercover. You're going to have to read what she's saying because the mic is so far from her in this undercover video. This occurred in 2014, the undercover video. It was published in 2015. Check this out.
A lot of people want to attack parts these days because they're looking for specific nodes. AB nodes, SA. I was like, wow, I didn't even know. Good for them. Yesterday was the first time she said people wanted lungs. And then, like I said, always as many attack livers as possible. People just want
livers.
Some people want lower extremities too, which that's simple. I mean, that's easy. I don't know what they're doing with it. I guess they want muscle.
Yeah, a dime a dozen.
You can actually order the body part you want.
I'm the medical director for the national office for all of the affiliates. So I say, okay, what are you looking to supply today? You're very good at getting heart, lung, liver. Every provider has had patients who want to donate their tissue, and they absolutely want to accommodate them. They just want to do it in a way that is not perceived as this clinic is selling tissue, this clinic is making money off of this.
Okay, so when you are or the affiliate is determining what that monetary.
Yes.
So that it doesn't raise any question of this is what it's about. This is the main. What price range would you?
You know, I'm going to throw a number out. I would say it's probably anywhere from $30 to $100, depending on the facility and what's involved.
The $30 to $100 price, that's per specimen that we're talking about, right? Yeah.
Yes.
The $30 to $100 price, that's per specimen that we're talking about, right? Yeah.
Yes.
How much of a difference can that actually make if you know what's expected or what we need versus?
It makes a huge difference. I'd say a lot of people want liver, and for that reason, most providers will do this case under ultrasound guidance, so they'll know where they're putting their forceps. Then a rate-limiting step of the procedure is calvarium. Calvarium, the head is basically the biggest part. Most of the other stuff can come out intact.
Right.
It's very rare to have a patient that doesn't have enough dilation to evacuate all the
To bring the body cavity out intact and all that.
So then you're just kind of cognizant of where you put your graspers. You try to intentionally go above and below the thorax so that, we've been very good at getting parts on liver because we know that, so I'm not going to crush that part. I'm going to basically crush below, I'm going to crush above, and I'm going to see if I can get it out intact. And with the calvarium, in general, some people will actually try to change the presentation so that's not a vertex. Because when it's a vertex presentation, you never have enough dilation in the case unless you have a real huge amount of dilation to deliver an intact calvarium. So if you do it starting from the breech presentation, there's dilation that happens as the case goes on, and often the last you can evacuate an intact calvarium. So I mean, there are certainly steps that can be taken.
So they can convert to breech, for example, at the start of the.
Exactly. Under ultrasound guidance, they can just change the presentation.
Now, Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of California when this video came to light. And who did Kamala Harris go after for selling body parts? Not Planned Parenthood. She didn't go after the organization selling baby body parts. She went after the guy who made the video, 𝗦𝗢𝗣𝗑𝗏𝗍𝗓. The trial is still going on, or he's still being held. It hasn't even happened yet. The trial, I think, is supposed to happen in December. This is 9 years later because she left that office, but she started the prosecution of the guy exposing what's going on. And just last month, the New York Post broke the story. Kamala Harris accused of weaponizing California's AG's office for mega sponsor Planned Parenthood. You see this? August 2nd, 2024. It's all coming to light now that Planned Parenthood gave her so much money that she decided she wasn't going to prosecute them. She was going to prosecute 𝗦𝗢𝗣𝗑𝗏𝗍𝗓 on a technicality that he made a fake license and videotaped people when he shouldn't have done so. No prosecution has occurred for the illegal selling of baby body parts. So, does abortion trump everything else? Look, I'm not a one-issue voter, but I am a one-issue disqualifier. Being pro-life doesn't make you automatically a good candidate, but being pro-abortion makes you a disqualified candidate. Because if you can't see that murdering people is wrong, what else can I trust you on? Oh, it's not a baby. Then why are they selling body parts? What do you think is in there? There's not a squirrel in there. There's not a giraffe in there. There's not just a blob of cells. There's a baby in there. What do you think Jesus would want you to do? What are the more important matters of the law? What are the more important matters of the law? Well, let's take a quick look at the platforms and the policies. I think these are very important matters. Maybe we'll quibble over one or two of them. Maybe you think there's another one that's more important, but I can't see anything more important than life. What's the Democrat position? Pay for it. Now all the way up to the moment of birth. Did you see in the debate when Trump tried to say to her, are you for it for the 7th, 8th, and 9th? And she's just shaking her head no, when in reality she is. In fact, she wouldn't vote for the Baby Born Alive Act. If abortion is botched and the baby's born alive, she doesn't want to protect that baby, just like Trump kept saying the governor of Virginia, who actually did say that. Oh, these abortions never take place in the 3rd trimester. Some of you may have seen what's been going on lately online about that young woman that called the abortion clinic and said, I'm 34 weeks, what can you do? They explained the whole procedure to her over the phone. Yeah, we'll inject the baby's heart with a solution that will kill it, then we'll dilate your cervix and take out the baby. Do you do this a lot? Oh yeah, I do it all the time. Even if it's 1%, that's 12,000 babies in the United States a year that are killed this way. And the Democrats have gone from the Bill Clinton, safe, legal, and rare, to come to our state. We'll pay you to come here. We'll pay for the abortion. You're voting for someone that wants to use your money to kill babies in the womb. Why? And Trump has actually softened the position on life, which is not a good thing. He's sloughing it off on the states to restrict it. However, Trump is not going to want to pay for it, quite obviously. He's not for it in the 3rd trimester, but this is going to be a problem for the Republicans moving forward. You know, that statement, that question that, Trump always gets, that the other side never gets it. If a national abortion ban would come across your desk, would you sign it? You know what he should have said? If a national abortion ban came across my desk, it would mean that the people wanted it. So that's why I'd sign it. But you know as well as I do, there's no national abortion ban coming across my desk. Certainly not a constitutional amendment. That would take 2/3 of each house and 3/4 of the states, 37 states. You've only got 14 states right now restricting abortion. You're never going to get there, at least not right now. So it's going to take an incremental approach. But to pay for abortion? And they know they're pulling body parts out of there. Look, I report, you decide, okay? Religious freedom. You've heard of the Equality Act? If the so-called Equality Act is passed, which is not about equality, ladies and gentlemen, the Equality Act would make anybody who objects to LGBTQ practices, their rights would be gone. There would be men and women sports, men and women locker rooms, people who did weddings, whether they're photographers, caterers, any of those people, they would have to do whatever the LGBTQ lobby says. Because now these rights, these new rights, these LGBTQ rights are more powerful than religious rights. The Republicans, of course, want to protect religious rights. By the way, these are fake rights, okay? You don't have the right to tell somebody else you need to participate in my wedding. You don't have the right to tell somebody else, I don't care about your conscience, you got to do what I say you do. But why are they now trying to pass this? Because they can't govern by principle. They have to govern by power. They have to force people against their conscience, against their religion, to do things that God says don't do. How about transitioning children? We're going to talk about this in a couple of weeks, but this is madness what's going on in our country right now. We're chopping the breasts off 13-year-old girls. And did you know that 80% of young people that have this so-called rapid onset gender dysphoria grow out of it by the time they're 18, and 96% grow out of it by the time they're 26? How does it make any sense at all to try and sterilize a child to fix a problem that's probably going to fix itself anyway, just through the passage of time? We'll talk more about that in a couple of sessions. But this is madness. The Democrats are for it. The Republicans are against it. In fact, in California, Governor Gavin Newsom just passed a law where it's illegal for a school teacher in a public school to tell the parent that the kid is transitioning. The state might even take that child and transition that child without the parent's knowledge. And Christians are going, I just preached the gospel. Wake up. You love people? You're going to allow this to continue? Judges, law-making judges, law-applying judges. This is how we've gotten these law-making judges. This is how we got Roe v. Wade to begin with. There's nothing in the Constitution about abortion. That's always been a state issue. Nothing in the Constitution about marriage. Marriage is always a state issue. Yet you've got these law-making judges usurping the will of the people and even the United States Constitution for their political gains. And what does Kamala Harris wants to do? She wants to pack the Supreme Court to get political decisions from a body that's not supposed to be political. Talk about a threat to democracy. Again, we're not a democracy. We're a representative republic. But the representative republic has to be run properly. Race-neutral policies. You won't believe me if I told you, or maybe you would. This was in the 2020 platform of the Democrats. It's hard to decipher what's going on now because it was all, the 2024 is Joe Biden's. And we don't know all the policies that Kamala Harris is supposed to be putting forth because she won't talk about them. But in the 2020 platform, they didn't think that race-neutral policies were good enough. In other words, they wanted to put affirmative action everywhere. Where, of course, the Republicans are against that. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't fix old racism by introducing new racism. How about school choice? Democrats are against it. Republicans are for it. In fact, there's a very robust school choice program in Arizona right now. It's helping a lot of Arizona kids, thankfully. And, of course, the border, that's self-evident. This is open for the Democrats, closed for the Republicans. You say, well, that's not in their platform. Of course it's not in their platform, but that's what they're doing. You say it's compassionate to leave the border open. No, it's not. How is it compassionate? Young girls are being trafficked over the border. Drugs are being trafficked over the border. Terrorists are coming over the border. How is this compassion? You know, everybody believes in borders. Do you have a lock on your door? Oh, you do. Why? Because you know you need security, that you just can't let anybody in your house without them being properly vetted. Same thing is true with the country. Now, there may be other issues, but that's a 10,000-foot view. Let me sum it up all this way. Politics is not our religion, but politics affects our religion, and our religion should affect our politics. So, can we legislate morality? That's all we can legislate. Should Christians be involved in politics? Of course. Just like every citizen ought to be involved. Are only atheists qualified to run the country? What should you do if you don't like either candidate? Vote on the more important matters of the law. Look, I wish we had great candidates that we'd like their personalities as well. But if we don't like their personalities, at least vote on their policies. What are the more important matters of the law? Both have records. Trump has a record. Kamala Harris has a record. Look at the records. Look at the policies. And see which one lines up more with the Bible on the more important matters of the law. All right, last thing before we go to questions. Here's Isaiah's warning to Israel about silent shepherds. In other words, the people that should have been warning the populace about sin. Here's what Isaiah said. Israel's watchmen are blind. They all lack knowledge. They're all mute dogs. They cannot bark. They lie around and dream. They love to sleep. They are dogs with mighty appetites. They never have enough. They are shepherds who lack understanding. They all turn to their own way. Each seeks his own gain. Look, pastor's a hard job. I could never be a pastor. It's the second hardest job in American Christianity. The hardest job is pastor's wife. Okay? But the second hardest job is to be a pastor. However, pastors, if you're out there listening to this and you're silent when the world's going to hell, when people in your congregation are disoriented because of the blizzard of change that has occurred just in the past 15 years since social media took up. If you're silent on the big issues that affect people's lives, you're like one of these mute shepherds. You need to speak the truth and leave the results to God. You say, what about my tax-exempt status? You're called to be salt and light, not tax-exempt. And by the way, no church has ever lost their tax-exempt status. You need to do what's right and leave the results to God. You don't need to endorse candidates. I don't endorse candidates. I'm not going to endorse Trump. Then I gotta speak for everything Trump says. No. Candidates will let you down, but you can endorse policies that are biblical. Look at the policies, see who lines up best, and then make a decision. Look, to be honest with you, when this election's over, if we ever get to the election after all these assassination attempts, I'm probably not going to be happy either way. I'll just be less unhappy. Because both of these candidates at the top are problematic. However, you're not just voting for one person. You're voting for 5,000 people to go to Washington and implement policies. Look at the policies, see where they line up, and make a decision. By the way, you know who would agree with this, with Isaiah, because he was a real Christian? Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You guys know who Bonhoeffer was? Bonhoeffer went up against Hitler in Nazi Germany, and Bonhoeffer paid with his life. He was executed just about a month before the Allies liberated Germany. He was actually implicated in the Valkyrie plot, July of 1944, where they actually tried to kill Hitler. I don't know how involved he was, but here's what Bonhoeffer said about how we need to be involved to protect innocent people from evil. Check this out. He said, mere waiting and looking on is not Christian behavior. The Christian is called to sympathy and action, not in the first place by his own sufferings, but by the sufferings of his brethren, for whose sake Christ suffered. He's saying, look, you got to speak up when people are being abused, when people are suffering. You just can't be silent about it. You've heard the story of the church that's singing their hymns louder so they can't hear the cries of the Jews on the train as it goes past the church on the way to the concentration camp. Is that all we do in America? We just sing our hymns louder? Shame on us. And then there was a group in Germany called the Oxford Movement. This was a group of Christians who thought the solution to the problem in Nazi Germany was to get Hitler converted. If we could only convert Hitler to be a Christian, all the problems would be solved. Do you know what Bonhoeffer thought about that? Here's what he said. The Oxford Movement was naive enough to try and convert Hitler, a ridiculous failure to recognize what is going on. We are the ones to be converted, not Hitler. You see his point? If we were living as Christians, we wouldn't even have Hitler. He wouldn't have made it. We're quiet, like Isaiah was saying, because we want personal gain. We just want the money to keep coming in. We don't want to rustle anybody up. We don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. We want to keep things calm. Just don't hurt me. I'll go along. Sure doesn't sound like we're denying ourselves to follow him, does it? Look, we're all guilty of this, right? We need to be converted. If we're converted, we can make a difference. And why? Look, I want to live in a country like this, not a country like this. How about you? So we better vote and vote biblically and get other people to vote biblically. Whether you like the personality or not, vote the more important matters of the law. Now, if you want more on this, first of all, go to voteyourfaith.net. When you go to voteyourfaith.net, you'll get a number of resources. You'll also see this iVoterGuide.com. Our friends at the American Family Association created a digital voting guide. Any address in America, if you go to iVoterGuide.com and put your address in, it's going to tell you all the candidates and where they stand. Which is great, right? Because you don't know who do you vote for in the insurance commission in North Carolina? I got no idea, right? They'll have some data on the candidates, and then you can make an informed decision. Also, if you follow this QR code, you're going to get a lot of free presentations, including one similar to this one. Just follow that QR code. I've written some books on this. One is called Correct, Not Politically Correct. This is about same-sex marriage and transgenderism. We'll talk about that in a few sessions. That book you can give to an unbeliever because there's no Bible verses in it. That's just the common sense, natural law case why same-sex marriage and transgenderism are not good for individuals and they're not good for society. I also deal with should Christians be involved in politics in that book. And then this DVD set, some of you have been through all the sessions because we recorded them in this Bible study. We cover about 23 different topics, including politics in that. We cover transgenderism, we cover economics and communism and socialism and CRT and a whole bunch of different things. So that DVD set you can get on our website. And Dr. Wayne Grudem, about 10 years ago, wrote this book, Politics According to the Bible. This is 600 pages. It covers just about every topic you could imagine. In fact, many years ago in 2016, September 2016, a group of us were invited to the Trump Tower because we were evangelicals and we weren't all behind Donald Trump. And so he wanted to meet with us. So we all went to the Trump Tower and Wayne Grudem was there and he gave Trump this big book. Like, read this, So Trump's putting it under his arm, walking out of his office there with this huge Politics According to the Bible. Anyway, that's a great book, a very helpful book. Also, again, if you go there, you can see this presentation by Pastor Gary Hamrick. You'll also see this presentation by our friend Alan Parr, who does some work with the ministry. He's got Should Christians Vote Democrat or Republican? So you can check that out. And for that, what we're going to do now is go to questions. All right. So I'll put that up again so you guys can see that again. So anyone have any questions? No one likes to ask the first question. Let's move right on to the second question. Sorry, we got to do the mic tonight because this is also online. So start up here. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Brian King.
Hey, Brian. Go ahead, sir.
Notice when you gave the issues and the Republican and Democrat platforms, you presented certain issues that would appeal to us in the church. What about some of the other issues where one party may not be as strong as another? For example, in our treatment of the poor. Yeah. Could you speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, that's
please?
An excellent question. First of all, there's a difference between a life and death issue and an ends and means issue. A life and death issue is like abortion. We shouldn't be arguing whether or not abortion ought to be outlawed. We all know biblically, we know from natural law, that the taking of innocent human life is wrong. The only exception to that would be life of the mother. Most cases, the baby can be saved, but if it's an ectopic pregnancy, the baby can't be saved, and the intent is not to kill the baby, it's to save the mother. Okay? That's a life and death issue. Taking care of the poor is an ends and means issue. I think both parties in good faith want to help the poor. That's the ends. But they have different opinions on how to best meet that end, different means. So, for example, Democrats tend to favor government handouts, where Republicans tend to favor a safety net, but then fewer government handouts. Let's try and make economic opportunities to give more opportunity because a rising tide lifts all boats. In fact, there are certain sections of Charlotte you may not know about that I think Trump was behind. These are called economic opportunity zones, where builders can build at reduced rates and sell below market level to certain people who qualify. Okay? Now, Democrats may have a similar plan to that. These are all ways to try and help the poor. Different means to the same end. Here's the problem. Christians can disagree over that. What's the best way to help the poor? But if one party wants to, at least to a certain extent, protect babies, and another party wants to pay for their destruction, should a differing plan over the poor cause anybody to say, well, I'm going to vote for the party that wants to kill babies because I think they have a slightly better plan to help the poor? That would not be majoring in the right, more important matters of law. It would be neglecting the more important matters of the law. Now, here's the problem. When you look at the war on poverty started by Lyndon Johnson in 1965, do you know that the poverty rate in America has not changed in almost 60 years? But you have a lot more people dependent on government. In fact, it's had an adverse, unintended impact. How do poor families get more money? They have more children as long as they kick the father out of the house, they get a lot more welfare. What has that led to? All sorts of social problems. Because the number one indicator of whether or not a kid is going to turn out to be a good citizen is what their home life was as a kid. That's the number one indicator. And if you throw fathers out of the house, I don't care how much money you give that family, that kid is starting from a much poorer position than if the father is in the house. And so we have actually created a whole underclass of dependency and a whole underclass of people that commit far more crimes, wind up in prison more, take more drugs, do all these things, and it just destroys the fabric of society. I don't know what the solution is to that because you just can't cut people off cold turkey. But I think Obama, or maybe it was Bush, one of those, I think maybe Bush had it in welfare to work, right? You got to move from welfare to work. You're helping people when you do that. You don't want them dependent. You're helping them. I think Obama may have gotten rid of that. Can't remember exactly, but welfare to work was a good thing. In fact, Bill Clinton may have started that. You gotta, look, we want a safety net, but it shouldn't be a hammock. And too many people treat it like a hammock. That's not good for them. It's not good for the kids. It's not good for the country. You know, one definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We've been doing this for 60 years. It's not working. Got to come up with a new plan. All right, so difference between life and death issue, ends and means issue. Anybody else? That's a good question. Yeah, go ahead. Clint may have some. Anybody out there watching online, if you put question in big block letters, if we can get to it in the chat, we will. Go ahead, Clint. What do you got?
What do you think about Christians voting third party?
Voting third party, that's a matter of conscience. You know, vote whatever your conscience tells you, given the biblical commands and what God wants us to do. Personally, I think voting third party is a waste of time, okay? Because look, it's either going to be Trump or Harris if Trump can make it to Election Day, okay? We're going to have a lady on the podcast this week who's a former FBI agent, actually an ex-Muslim too, and we're going to talk about how is this happening? How are all these assassination attempts even possible? What's going on in our government? So I think voting third party, look, it's a matter of conscience, but for me, it's like not voting. It's really what you're doing. You're not voting. I'm sending a message. Oh yeah, a lot of people are going to look at that. Gee, that person got 0.07% of the vote. Wow. No. This election, if like previous elections, is going to be decided by a few thousand votes in probably 7 battleground states. So, and if you want to keep track of what's going on, you can look at the Charlie Kirk's organization called TP Action, and there's actually a app, I think, called TP Action, and you can see how many are registered, how many people are voting. They'll even tell you who in your neighborhood is registered because that's public information, that kind of thing. So if you want to encourage people to vote, you can say, hey, I noticed you haven't registered to vote. How do you know that? It's public information. Why don't you vote? All right. Yes, sir. Come on up if you don't mind. Yeah, if anybody has a question, you can just line up back there so we don't have to wait. Clint, anyone else while this gentleman's coming up on the chat?
What is the biblical perspective on climate change as an issue? Is it part of creation care, like caring for creation?
A lot of people don't know this, but I'm an environmentalist. I have a BA in environmental studies. That was my undergrad degree. I, like most of you, I think, want the environment to be clean, right? But that doesn't mean that every single environmental program is a good program. We have actually a mandate from the Creator to take care of the environment. Unlike atheists, they don't have any mandate. We have a mandate to do so. Here's a problem, though, with climate change. First of all, even if man-made climate change is causing an increase in global temperatures, if the United States decreased their carbon footprint to 0, which is impossible, it wouldn't affect global temperatures hardly at all. Because who's putting all this out? It's China, India, third world countries. Secondly, those third world countries need to use fossil fuels in order to feed their people. I don't know if you heard about the situation in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was coming out of third world status. They signed the Paris Accords. They tried to live up by cutting back their carbon emissions. The people rose up because their poverty went to like well over 20%. The starvation rate, they ran the president out of the country. Because you see, this is a system, and people don't think systematically. Sure, it would be nice if climate change really is causing, or humans really are causing climate change to reduce carbon emissions, but people forget the cost. If we try and do that too dramatically, people will starve to death. There's a domino effect here. The third thing you got to keep in mind is the fact that, you know, that there have been dramatic changes in climate before there were human beings on the earth. You know, we had ice ages and warm ages and all sorts of different temperature variations. Why don't the climate people ever tell us, you know, the climate's been changing forever? Why do we even think we're doing it? So, yes, there is a mandate to take care of the environment, but that doesn't mean that every single program that comes down the pike is a good program to support. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Tom Clark.
Hey, Tom. Yeah.
And I have a question because I understand, first of all, I like my statement. I understand what you're talking about Christians getting involved in politics, and we look at it from the viewpoint of Democrat versus Republican and the platform and so forth. But I think the conversation should be raised to a higher level.
Like, what do you mean?
Good versus evil.
Okay, sure.
Tyranny versus freedom.
Yeah.
And that what's the intention behind the people that are doing what they're doing. In other words, I see a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle. They're doing it for power.
Sure. Yeah.
And if what they're presenting to us is virtue signaling, that's what they're doing for our good, which it's really not. They never accomplished anything. You said the poverty level is the same as it was 60 years ago. They haven't solved any problem. They don't intend to solve any problem. They just tend to present things because their intent behind it is evil. The evil intent is to gain power over us. And the scripture, as you know, says that at the end of the age, the deception is going to grow very high.
Sure.
And it'll deceive even the elect, if that was possible.
That's right, yeah.
So let's try to look at what's going on from the eyeglasses or the perception of where's the good and evil happening in the things that we're being seen.
Yes, and I think it's a good question to bring up. Are you voting for the greater good or the lesser evil? You know what the answer is? Yes. Okay? And there's no perfect party. There's no perfect candidate. But I'm right now looking to limit evil. And any good that I can, first of all, that's a good to limit evil, right? And I'm also voting for certain good things. And so when you look, can we all agree both parties are absolutely horrific on debt? I mean, they may spend it on different things, but do you realize in the hour or so it's taken us to record this presentation, that the United States government has overspent in 1 hour about $400 million? That's not spending, that's overspending. I mean, the deficit this year is like 1.8 trillion. That's 1,800 billion. What is that? Is that 180? I can't even do the math anymore. I mean, that's crazy. Parties need to get spending under control. Yes, sir, go ahead.
So my name's Cole. My question is really on, like, how do we approach the issue of abortion with some that would disagree? And here's really my dilemma, I guess, sometimes. Is it more of an evidentialist view or a presuppositionalist view where we're approaching that? Because I find that when I'm having that conversation with people, they use old arguments, right, that are quite dated, right, that don't line up with what we know about science now. And eventually, if I'm presenting an evidential argument, eventually it come to the point where I'm okay with killing a human.
Okay, move on to somebody else.
Right?
Move on to somebody else. Because if they're going to say I'm okay to kill another human, Bill Maher admitted that recently. Yeah, I know it's a human being. I was on his show like 20-something years ago, and I said it's a human being. Bill goes, it's not a human being. It's just a blob of tissue. Now he's admitting it's a human being, right? But he's okay with it. Okay. He said, there's enough people out there. We don't need any more. Who's he, Thanos?
Right. And I asked that question because Romans 2, right? The law is written on our hearts. Sure. So everyone deep down really knows that this is wrong and it's murder.
Look, here's the easiest way to show people that abortion should not happen. Go to caseforlife.com, caseforlife.com, scroll down, watch the 1-minute video. I can't show you that video here because YouTube would censor it. I tried to show it before, shut the video down. It's too true. It will show you the results of an abortion in all 3 trimesters. 1 minute, no narration, just pictures of unborn children. You will see in the first trimester, you'll see hands cut off. You'll see it. And once you see it, you go, okay, that shouldn't happen. All right? So forget all the arguments. Yeah. Just watch this video. See that? Okay. Right there. There it is. Yeah. Should you do that? You're going to say yes?
Right.
Have a nice day. Move on to somebody else.
Right. Thank you.
All right. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, half of Christians don't even vote. If you're concerned about our country, get more Christians to vote. You don't need to convince one leftist, one liberal, one atheist, one person that is disagreeing with the Bible. You just need to convince Christians to be Christians and to vote biblically. If that were the case, the entire country would be red. Meaning it would line up, not Republican, but it would line up with conservative values. Because not all the Republican values are right, but it would line up with what the Bible says. But Christians don't. We're too busy on our next Netflix binge, or, we got too many other things to do. It's not going to matter anyway. I've heard some Christians say, oh, why vote? There's so much cheating going on. I can guarantee you that your vote will not count. The one way your vote will not count is if you don't vote. Just do what's right, leave the results to God. That's all we can do. Yes, ma'am. You got to use the mic if you don't mind. We'll just take 1 or 2 more. Clint, you got anything else back there? What's that? Go ahead. Well, this lady's coming up.
What would you say to, the most compelling thing you would say to someone or ask them who thinks they're a Christian but is pro-choice?
I would go to caseforlife.com. Scroll down to that video, 1 minute, watch it, tell me if you're still pro-choice and why. And just see what they say. Now, whenever you talk about abortion, you always have to say there's forgiveness under the blood of Christ, because many of us have either had abortions or encouraged them. I'm not here to condemn anybody who has. I'm here to prevent people in the future from doing it again and to showing people what the law should be. Now, let's be honest, in America, we're not going to get a complete ban on abortion. because we haven't done our job. The church hasn't done our job. It's not the Republican Party's problem. It's our problem. We haven't done the job to show people why abortion should be unthinkable. So we've got to bring people along incrementally. Save as many babies as you can, even if you can't save them all. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I'm not used to speaking on the mic, but
That's okay. Go ahead.
so there's something called myfaithvotes.org. And if you go on to myfaithvotes.org, you can sign up to, it's called Right Now 2024. And they will send you, I mean, it does all the things these other sites do too. It tells you your district, helps you to register, tells you what your
Great.
candidates stand for, etc. I get so passionate about it that I can hardly talk sometimes.
That's okay.
In any case, what they do is I just signed up for 50 letters. You can sign up for 500 letters. What happens is they'll download to you the letter, okay, to send, and you're sending it to Christians who don't vote,
Oh, good. Okay.
okay? And they receive, and you get the letter, but you put it in the envelope, you stamp it, you write it by hand, okay? And also in that thing, then they tell you the site to find out all the issues and how to register and stuff like that. So then you can write a note on the bottom. You just don't put your name or your address. You put your name and your initial for your last name, but that's it. And then there are certain rules you have to follow. You can't go telling people who to vote for in your letter, you know what I mean? But they can see it all. But it's for Christians. So you're reaching
Myfaithvotes.com.
Yeah, myfaithvotes. So,
Okay.
I mean, I'm sending them to 50 Christians in North Carolina.
Good.
I will do more probably, but I have to see what it's like before I.
Yes.
You just download them, and that's it. So.
Just do something, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you vote, your friends vote, the people in your church vote. Go to myfaithvotes.com or go to TP Action if you want to see what else is going on with that regard. You can go to this website, YourFaithNet, voteyourfaith.net has a lot on it. Last one from the chat.
How do you overcome fear and stand up with courage to preach the truth?
I don't know. I'm afraid to tell you. Well, I think I'm reminded of what 𝗦𝗘𝗓 said in his book, Live Not by Lies. 𝗦𝗘𝗓 points out that former Soviet dissidents who lived through the Iron Curtain are scared to death of what's going on in America today because they see our freedoms being eroded, not just by a tyrannical government, but even by big tech and this stifling political correctness, this woke ideology. And what 𝗦𝗘𝗓 recommends is something that occurred at the end of World War II. I think it was in Czechoslovakia. There was a Catholic priest there who realized the Nazis were not going to survive the war, that they were going to be defeated. But he realized also that the Soviet Union would come in and put an iron curtain on them. So he advised everybody in his congregation, in his parish, he said, we all need to get into small groups now. Get into small groups now, start meeting every week, support one another, pledge to support one another, so that when the Soviets come in and put this iron curtain down, if somebody loses their job because of their faith or their political stance, you're going to come support that person and try and find them another job. That's the only way people will have enough courage to stand up, is if they have a backup. Every one of us needs a backup. Get into small groups now, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it will embolden you, because you know you have people behind you to support you if difficulty does arise. So, and also, of course, pray, meet with other Christians. And courage is called encouraging because when people stand up for the truth, other people go, yep, I ought to be doing that too. One person stands up, other people will start standing up. This has to happen in corporate America too. You need to start standing up against this DEI nonsense because it's wrong. That's why. It's even hurting the people it's trying to help. Oh, I know why you're here. You're the diversity hire. That's not fair to that person. We now have a DEI candidate for president, if you haven't noticed. What has she done? Hasn't even got any votes yet. All right, Matt, we got to go, but we can talk privately. I don't want to keep people too late. But why don't we close in prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you. You've given us a free country, at least thus far. We know that freedom is never free and that righteousness needs to be defended. If Christians don't defend righteousness, who will, despite our faults? Help us to be people that follow you and not the culture. We follow the truth, not political leaders. We only support the policies that they put forth and then try and make those biblical policies a reality. I pray for everybody who's involved in politics, President Biden, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, all of our state and local representatives. I pray that you'd guide them to do what's right, according to your will, not their own or our own. And may you be in this election, protect all the candidates from these assassination attempts. Pray you'd restore calm and that people would follow you, not follow their desires or their whims. But I pray that we would do what's right and leave the results to you. In Christ's name, amen.